we get our little note yet? All right. Okay. So good evening. This is a meeting of the commission's body-worn cameras ad hoc committee. I'm going to go around and just have everybody indicate. Actually, I can probably indicate who's here, but I am chair of the committee, Brenda Harbin Forte. Have we heard from Commissioner Harbin Forte, I should say. Did we hear from Commissioner Peterson yet? Jesse, I know you texted her. Did she reply? Okay. All right.
No.
Okay. So why don't we go ahead and I'm just going to look at my screen. We got Lieutenant Joe Turner from OPD. We got Chief Reginald Lyles. We have Officer Felicia Cervantes from OPD. Deputy Director Kiana Suttle from OPD. Jason Wechter who's Jason Wechter?
CPRA.
CPRA, that's right. Okay, and then we have a Jody Geddes. And Jody, if you can, I'm going to come back to you in a few minutes, Jody, because you're from RJOY. I'm going to have you introduce yourself to everybody. We have Frida Caro from CPRA, and we have Katie Dixon from the ACLU. And Jody, this is your first meeting on behalf of Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth. And I just want you to say hello. It'd be great if you can come on camera. And also let me indicate that Commissioner Marsha Peterson is here as well. So Jody Geddes, hi, welcome. You're substituting for Tiasha Bankhead, who is Executive Director of Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth, or RJOY. And I am but Tiasha is on vacation, not able to be here, so you're subbing for her. Tell us, just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what RJOY is doing in connection with community policing and police accountability stuff.
Hello, everyone. I'm just going to name that a 2-year-old might pop up. There's a lot happening right now. My name is Jody Geddes. I'm currently the director of BJS JIS program. In addition to that, I'm also the healing services manager at RJOY. A lot of our work right now looks like training partners at the intersection of mental health and wellness and restorative justice. So what does it mean to have a trauma-informed lens while engaging in restorative practices? In addition to doing that, also partnering with OPD to think about what does just intervention look like around kind of substance abuse as well as mental health and wellness, so that we make sure people are not cycling in and out of the system, but receiving the services they need. A part of that also is thinking about what does it mean to establish a warm line so that people have higher access to kind of resources, support, and services, and centering that within community while also partnering with those who continue to serve community. So I hope that was helpful. I'm speaking kind of fast because here she comes. So thank you all.
Okay, and RJOY got a grant to study what, to do what?
Looking at the intersection between restorative justice and can you sit down?
Oh, and the mental health
And
aspect of it.
mental health, that's intervention.
Okay, all right then. And no worries about the 3-year-old, because I was not supposed to be babysitting my 3.5-year-old great grandson this evening, but I have him. I almost said stuck with him, so he may well pop in as well. So everybody will. Everybody's nodding. They've been there, so they know.
Thank you all for having me tonight as well.
Yeah, thank you for being here. Any questions for Jody or about RJOY or anything? Let's see. Okay. All right. I'm not going to have everybody go introduce themselves to Jody so we can get going now. But okay. Commissioner Peterson, you're on there. Okay. Why don't we just sort of pick, we indicated that there would be a special agenda item tonight, which is to talk about what the information that Frida Caro gave us that was that's being disseminated by what is the group, Frida? Police Accountability? Or you guys
Yeah.
have to? Okay.
It was it's from the Coalition of Police Accountability. I got it through Commissioner Howell.
Okay. And there's some concern about whether it may misstate the rules regarding body worn cameras and when they need to be activated, when they can be turned off. So I'm going to actually ask Lieutenant Turner to go ahead, maybe to kind of talk a little bit about it and whether there is some confusion or misstatements.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. Yeah, so I think there is a little confusion. So just for everyone's sort of awareness, you can see, thank you, Commissioner Schaefer, posting this on the screen. But this is a flyer, I think, that the Coalition for Police Accountability, which is a separate sort of NGO, non-governmental organization, put out after a policy that the Police Department and the Police Commission worked on a few years ago, which is DGO R like Robert 2, which is about supervised release searches. And so when that was one of the first policies that the police department worked on in concert with the police commission, and it does do a lot of the things that it noted in there. But as you can kind of see in the last bullet point, it says that, you know, the policy reminds officers that they must keep their body camera on during every encounter with the public. So that is a mischaracterization of the policy and kind of our current policies. As you all know, the current policy, which is available to the public, the body worn camera policy, it does not have that officers are required to have their body worn camera on during every encounter, nor does the supervised release search policy state that. What it actually does is just refer the staff back to the body worn camera policy and state that officers must follow the policy when they are engaged in these searches. So one of the requirements of our body worn camera policy currently is that anyone who is engaged in a search, for instance, or a detention, which would happen with the person who is on supervised release who's being searched by the police, they're detained, that the camera needs to be on. But there is a little bit of not necessarily confusion, but what this does is it is a good sort of segue or jumping off point to talk about, I think, probably the larger question, which is kind of when, I think, and this is something that this ad hoc is probably grappling with, when when the cameras of the officer should be on and during what circumstances.
With respect to that last, that bullet point that we've highlighted, that they have to have them on during every encounter with the public, or there should be a record of your encounter. To the extent it may misstate what the policy is, what would be the correct statement?
Yeah, so the correct statement is that officers are required to have their cameras on when they're conducting detentions and when they're conducting searches of persons. So for persons who are on supervised release, who are being searched by Oakland's police, the camera should be on. That's absolutely true. There should be a record of an encounter if a person who's on supervised release is being searched by the police. That's absolutely true. It's just the first part. And I think this is just probably an issue with language around saying, that officers must keep their body camera on during every encounter with the public. That's the part that's incorrect.
That's an overstatement. So were they to correct it to say that they need to keep them on during every encounter with anyone on supervised release or something, or?
Well, if they're conducting searches of persons on supervised release, because just because you're on supervised releases does not mean, and right, our policy has changed so that that's not an automatic detention. It's not an automatic search. In fact, our policy is very clear that there needs to be reasons why we are searching people on supervised release. So the way that the policy now is sort of set up is to make sure that it captures these things like detentions, arrests, searches. And it is not designed to capture every encounter with the public, because we understand that our officers are going to have a lot of different encounters with the public. I have an encounter with the public every morning when I go get coffee, for instance. So it's not designed to capture everything. It's designed to capture those instances where the officers are using their law enforcement powers. So I know this is a good way to sort of think about and talk about some of these issues. I know that Chief Armstrong has actually joined because there is kind of this question, and there's the question of how often do we want the body worn cameras of the officers to be on, and during what circumstances. So right now, our policy is that during circumstances where officers are detaining people, where they are arresting people, where they're searching, where they're using force, where they're engaged in pursuits, these type of law enforcement activities, that's when the body worn cameras are going to be on.
Okay, and let me welcome Chief Armstrong. Hi, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I am going to let you weigh in whenever Commissioner Vice Chair Peterson has her hand up for something, and we'll hear from her, and then we can hear from the chief. But what I'd be also interested in is if we were to go back to the Coalition for Police Accountability, and we could say, fine, this is a good flyer, but we think that you should clear up this particular language here and just suggest to them what that language should be, so that we don't confuse the public out there. So, but Commissioner Peterson, Vice Chair Peterson.
Yes, good evening, and thank you everyone for joining this ad hoc. I think we got kind of stuck on this even last time we met, when we were trying to make it very clear to the public, give them as much information as we possibly could about when body worn cameras are or aren't going to be on. The public is really looking forward to being educated fully on these body worn cameras. So I'll go back to what Commissioner Brenda Harvin-Forte was asking. What should be said? I don't think we should just say, refer to the body worn camera ordinance policy, but instead, is there any way to say they should have them on at all times, except, is there any way to, because I know there are very few exceptions, but otherwise they should have these cameras on if they are on active duty, engaging with the active duty. I think we said they are in uniform. We got stuck on whether or not when they are in plain clothes, like ID investigations. But we have to find a way to inform the public, not just refer them to other policies. We don't want to send them down a rabbit hole in this regard. So how can we state this so that the public will be clear that body worn cameras are on, except, is that a way? And I've asked the chief, because we did get stuck last time.
Chief Armstrong.
Yeah, hi, Commissioner, and
Hi.
hi, Judge Harvin-Forte and other members. Just want to ask it. I want to come in and I think reference a couple things tonight to make sure that as we have these discussions, that we understand the overall premise for this equipment, the unintended consequences when we expand things, because there is a cost to expand it, right? There also that expanding cost not only is a financial cost to the city when you record more than we're recording now. So when we took on these new cameras, which are much more high definition cameras than the previous cameras that we had, they eat up a tremendous amount of data. If we were to expand further than we have expanded at this point, the price tag is in the $3 million range to be able to get the data bandwidth of almost a 24-hour coverage, right? A full 10-hour shift for every single officer. I think when we start talking about expansions, we have to understand what is the cost associated with the data that's going to be now captured in the cloud, right? So it means that we're going to go from, say, 3 terabytes to 6 to 8 to 10, whatever the case may be, depending on how much data that we'll collect as a result of having 600 or 700 people with cameras that are having them on much more than they probably have had on in the past. And so I think those are the discussions that we have when we decide what is the most appropriate way in which the camera should be utilized. The first thing we want to make sure is that every investigative stop that we take on, that the camera is on. We also want to make sure that when we initiate contact with someone and an event turns into, whether it's a search or some type of investigative contact, that camera is activated. We're engaged in some type of investigative pursuit, that camera is activated, right? So our policy sort of lays out all the areas that we think are clear, that they're clear, and this has sort of been vetted with the federal monitor. And as we have struggled for several years to come into full compliance with this mandate of activation of cameras, this has been something that has been a part of many discussions with the judge, right, who's given us a sanction. But I give credit to the city. They invested $10 million into this new system that we currently have. We just deployed these new cameras at the beginning of the year. Obviously, you all had them tested. I also say that, one of the things I'm struggling with right now as the chief is that every time we create new policy, I know our intention is to be progressive and try to, make sure that we are holding our officers accountable. There's an unintended consequence. Right now, what we're saying is that if our officers are dispatched to a call now, a call that typically would take 15 to 20 minutes for the officer to clear, because of the administrative requirements, that officer is spending another nearly 30 to 40 minutes on administrative tasks. That is, the officer spends more time on administrative tasks than he actually spends on the actual contact or interaction with the public. And what is the impact? The impact is that the criticism that we take currently is that officers are never available to respond to calls in a timely manner. Well, a call can't be cleared until the officer does what the policy mandates that he or she does prior to clearing that call. That could be, completing a type 32 use of force report. That could be, annotating some type of report in our CAS system. That could be starting a police report that needs to be completed. That could be transcribing some statement that they've taken. All of these things that need to be done in order for the officer to actually clear a call is the administrative task that takes an enormous amount of time. So when I'm talking about unintended consequences, we have to discuss also what does that mean on the back end? That when the officer downloads much more data, how much more data does the officer have to go through during a given shift to make sure that data is uploaded into the system, that data doesn't include something that might need to be reported per policy? Is that something that a supervisor needs to review? I think there's all these different concerns that from my perspective about what is the impact to the organization with expansion. What does expansion really mean for me? And what, how do I do it without obviously, taking on a new financial request to the city, but also bogging down the officers with more administrative time as we try to actually respond to calls in a much more faster or expedited fashion. So.
Okay, Commissioner Shea. Thank you, Chief.
And thank you, Chief. Couple of questions about what you just mentioned. First, I think I heard a $3 million figure. So that's going to be the difference between what you're currently paying and what some number of additional storage for the increased load that you're mentioning?
Yes. So the expansion of the load that we have now, we have a fixed cost that the department, the IT department pays now. In our conversations with them, the expansion of the cloud that we use to upload that will come with a hefty cost in order to expand that cloud pretty significantly. Because the expansion includes, this high definition data. The clearer the video, the more it takes to store that technology. And so that's
So
why.
What's the difference between how much is the storage now? How much is the storage you're envisioning? And what are the other tiers of storage? Do you have those?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends. I think it all depends on, and I can have Joe talk to our IT to get the specific numbers. And it depends on how much do we anticipate new data, the expansion of the system. I would say if right now we have 100 say CID investigators, just for instance, if we were to say that now CID investigators need to carry cameras, that is 100 additional officers that would be uploading data that doesn't upload data now, right? And that's the size of a small police department, 100 officers. But that's the size of our criminal investigation division, who currently now don't wear cameras, in the way in which we're talking about now. So I think, it's about, when we talk about some command staff who typically spend the vast majority of their shifts, in the building, taking on administrative tasks, but they're in uniform, right? And so, we talk about that now in uniform, you got cameras on, they do interact or talk to people, but if those cameras are used, like we said, all the time, that is all additional data that's uploaded. So the vast majority, I would say probably right now, you're talking about 300 or some odd cops in patrol who represent the vast majority of the uploads now. I think we can work with Joe, but Joe can probably give you a better figure. That number might jump to about, say, 400, 450, right? That now will be uploading. That's a pretty sizable increase in the number of people that now will be uploading. But that also means that the system that was, obviously taken in, that we were using that for 300 officers now would have to expand to accommodate the additional 450. And then also the additional video that we would be taking beyond what we take today, if that makes sense. So even the 300 would upload more video today, and then add in 150 would upload any more. So we'll get the figures to go from, if we went up to, 2 more terabytes or 10 terabytes, or whatever the case may be based on that, and let DIT give us a figure.
The reason why I asked that is because we also, the new body worn cameras have only been rolled out for, was it 6 months or so, maybe a year, right? And right now the data retention policy is 2 years, right? Unless it's required for something else. Most of the time it's going to be required for something else, right? So it realistically, a good chunk of video is going to be retained beyond those 2 years. And so my immediate question is, are we going to hit those limits anyways in 2 years, right? Or in 3 years, or in 4 years, where it and then so that's question number 1. Also 2, question number 3 is, if you were to add maybe some in-between measures, right? So right now we're talking about 2 extremes, what the policy is right now, and a policy where every interaction with the public must have a body-worn camera equipped, on, recorded, etc. Right? There are obviously many variations in between. We can think about those variations and what they may represent in terms of ultimate load on the data and the cloud, and what that may look like and what the cost of that may be, right? Because I do think that there is definitely a drive and a push for more recordings involving the public. That doesn't necessarily mean every single one. It could, but we want to also know what our alternatives are to just keeping the status quo.
Well, I first want to say that I don't know where that comes from when the statement is that there's more requests from the public. I think we have probably the most, I think one of the most comprehensive video recording policies in the country, around one of the few departments that actually mandate that officers activate cameras before contact. Now, I know there's some that record everything. I know there's some that go far beyond us, but we do some use of force. I mean, I think that there's a couple new departments that are taking on a pretty sizely task, but we're also the only department that actually analyzes that data, right? So we've produced, 2 reports that actually said we actually analyze the use of force data. We actually analyze the stop data. We actually use the data that we collect to actually better understand how we're interacting with the public. So from my perspective, I haven't seen or received complaints from the public about data that they didn't receive, right? Or we haven't had an officer involved shooting or incident where we didn't have cameras on, our officers intentionally violated policy. But I think that's because we've had cameras for a very long time, and we've had late activations, which is what led to this new technology. I think that has been the emergent issue for us, is the late activation of cameras, which we believe is resolved in some ways by some automatic activation technology that we've just employed, some of which we need to have some glitches worked out. But the emergency lights and sirens, we've actually, uncovered, and I think CPRA can say that. I think our cameras have recovered a lot of unreported things that we've found as a result of analyzing data. So, I think it concerns me when I hear it all the time, because I do think that there's exceptions that the public would expect, like if we're going to take certain reports, the public's option to say that they don't want to be recorded, or when we are doing some covert work that we don't want, or from an administrative perspective, that where it's not appropriate for it to be on, because it could become an officer safety risk by people understanding how we handle certain things, and that obviously could pose a risk to us, because when people see those things, they prepare to how they're going to overcome those things. And so I think there are several situations where it may not be appropriate to have a camera on at that time. And I think those issues are worth discussing as well, is about maybe what are those exceptions? What do they look like when the camera isn't on, right? I think that, to me, because I think right now we know it's on the vast majority of the time, nearly all the time, but there are exceptions when it shouldn't be on, if we're discussing certain things, particularly maybe people's personal information, maybe, how we're gonna, deal with an emergent situation. I think those things, again, I think there's things that we have to consider that I wouldn't agree that we need to have a camera on.
I'm gonna let Vice Chair.
So that was really my point, Chief. How do we craft a better paragraph that informs the public about when we have them on and these are the exceptions?
I think, Commissioner Peach, I think you started off right. I think we can craft a paragraph that says the Oakland Police Department mandates that their officers have on their body-worn cameras during nearly every contact, or however you guys word that, because 95% of the time that camera will be on. So I think it's just writing it in a way that captures that the vast majority of the time, nearly all the time, that camera will be on, because in most cases it's going to be mandated. There may be these exceptions of when a camera may not be on, right? And those exceptions, are limited to whatever you guys determine those to be. And officers should have to document those exceptions when those exceptions are utilized, right? So if you say an exception is because we had a tactical situation, then, and we can outline to the public what those situations are, so that the public knows in advance, hey, they should have their cameras on unless these exceptions are met. And if these exceptions are used, officers should be documenting why, why these exceptions apply, right?
And so, Chief, we're not trying to identify phantom problems. We don't want to do that, but we do want to be able to assure the public that this thing called a body-worn camera, which has become more in the public view, a way of checking police behavior, along with everybody's cell phone these days. So we would just like to put as much in the policy about what they should expect. I don't want to create any new avenues, but I think whatever we've created, we need to be able to explain it clearly.
I agree. I think we activated a lot. I think you guys have covered a couple areas where we can probably strengthen that activation. And I think that's been captured. But I also think, to your point, I think we write it in a way that says that camera should be on when you have, you can expect that the camera will be on when you have a contact with the police officer, unless these exceptions apply.
Yeah.
And that will be very few exceptions.
Yes.
And then if those exceptions
And we
apply.
would even say with few exceptions.
Yeah.
Great, good. Okay, Chief Lyles, go ahead.
I just think that we ought to be cognizant that when we talk about a policy and then we tell the public we have to refer you to another policy,
I want that.
that's what gets confusing. I think the writing of these policies ought to be in kind of a common person speech. I don't know, 10th grade level, 9th grade level.
Seventh grade.
Yeah, so we can make sure that everybody understands it. Stay away from acronyms. Try not to, try to write so briefly. Maybe more words are better. So folks who read this stuff are just confused. Now I got to go to another policy. So if we're going to put out something about supervised release, let's try not to refer people to something else. Let's put everything we need to have in each policy that we write. That's necessary. That explains our intentionality. My second point is that, I don't know this for a fact, but maybe you can help me out. Do we know how much money the city of Oakland pays off in these civil litigations? Because I was thinking that the body-worn camera would reduce money there and be a great savings for the department and the city. That's a question.
So I want to answer both questions. First, I think we have to have a common understanding of why we write policy, right? Why we write Oakland Police Department policy is to govern the actions of Oakland police officers. So it has to be written in a way that is consistent with the policies and trainings and actions of Oakland police officers. So when we say we're writing a policy, I understand that we want to write a policy that the public understands, but the policy is not intended to govern the public. The policy is intended to govern the officer's actions, right? And I, as the chief, I have to hold these officers accountable to a policy that is consistent to what they're trained to do, right? And what we expect them to do. And so when I write policy and we attach and we associate a policy with another policy, is because we clearly understand that policy is going to directly overlap with this policy, right? And those expectations that exist currently already exist in, say, a probation and parole policy would be ones that we would actually reference in this policy because we want to bring the connection between the two. Now, I could have a stop of a probation and parole, and maybe it's not investigative. Maybe it is just a person that I know. But if this policy says that if I know that the person's on probation and parole, I have to activate the policy anyway, that overlap helps us connect the two. That hey, you mandated to do it per the probation and parole policy, but also is covered in the body-worn camera policy to make sure that officers are clear when they look at each policy that this certain guidance that's specific to this group has to be done. When we talk about use of force, when our use of force policy says you have to activate that body-worn camera when you have with a use of force or pursuit, then we expect that these things, when we say activating body-worn camera, we're going to remind them again in the body-worn camera policy. Hey, this camera must be activated during use of force or pursuits. From a risk management standpoint, it's always better for me to have policies that cover what they need to cover. But if there's overlap or ways in which we can reference other policies as reminders, it helps officers to reinforce what officers are expected to do in these particular situations. So that's why, we write them in that way. The language that we use when we train them, if we use certain terminologies during the training process, If we classify a defensive tactics maneuver as such and such, then that's the consistent language I want them to write when they're doing the policy, because officers have to understand what they can do and what they can't do. So when we say carotid for restraint is illegal and prohibited, our use of force policy, although we wrote a policy specifically for that, but our use of force policy needs to capture that specifically to say, hey, reminder, carotid is prohibited, right? And not an authorized use of force. But these are consistent reminders that we put in policies, particularly to capture areas that we see as high risk areas that we know that officers are likely to need clarity on, if you would, about things that will get you in trouble, things that we have seen, like a chokehold. Like we've said very clearly, you cannot put your knee on somebody's neck, right? Now we're gonna put that in the use of force policy, but we also gonna cover it in our defensive tactics policy, right? Or training bulletin. We're gonna say that's prohibited, right? These actions are prohibited. So we do those crossovers into other policies just to make sure that there's an overlap and a connection between the two. And so that officers are reminded about specific things that we see as really problematic areas. The other thing is, I'll go to your second question. So the one thing I will say, we took on body worn cameras, I believe in 2010, was it, or was it 12? Joe, I'm 2010, 2012, 2010. I think there's a report that was produced by the plaintiff's attorneys that said 20 years, so from 2010 and 20 years back, the city of Oakland paid $58 million in civil lawsuits against the Oakland Police Department. Over a 20-year period, $58 million was paid, and that included the Ryder settlement and other multi-million-dollar settlements. Since the Oakland Police Department has utilized body-worn cameras since 2010, that amount has dramatically decreased. On the average, we spend less than $2 million a year, and in most cases, the money that we pay out now in civil suits tend to be connected to vehicle collisions. We are not the subject of civil suits related to use of force. We are not related civil suits related to other types of misconduct. There are some, misconduct, but the vast majority of those conduct, I think recently we paid out one for an illegal arrest that was one that was litigated, and the city chose to settle for less than $250,000. But other than that, there's no multi-million-dollar lawsuits. We're not paying those things out anymore. But vehicle collisions tend to be the most costly thing that we are challenged with right now. It has led to the two biggest settlements that we've had over the last 10 years has actually been vehicle pursuits. Vehicle collisions that have resulted in significant injury to the person.
Well, that's good news. I'm glad to hear that. And I would like to suggest that you somehow get that out to the public. I don't know if the public understands that. Maybe they're operating on, the information that happened in the past, and they need some fresh news about how progress has been made. But back to my first question, I think you kind of went off on a different area of what I was speaking of. I'm trying to say that in the policy, there ought to be clear speech. And if you got to use acronyms and all that kind of stuff, explain what that is. I have no problem with referencing other policies that cross. That's not the intent. But I just think that you don't want to say to your officer, well, I won't say to your officers, I'll just speak about what the public should desire, that they don't have to go through 4 or 5 policies to get at what they're looking for in the initial policy. And that seems to put people on, a wild goose chase that they're not going to go on. They're just going to be confused. And so they ought to be, I don't think it's mutually exclusive that the policies can be written both informative and instructive and legal for the officers, and equally informative to the public from whom they work for, to who they serve. So they can have an expectation of what an officer can and will not do.
So I'll say that the standard, I think you're right, from the standpoint that the standard is that we should be writing it towards the 8th grade level, right? I think, you know, our city attorneys have advised, is it 8th grade or 10th grade, Joe?
Yeah, the 8th grade, sir.
So the city attorney tells us 8th grade. Jesse, I know you said 6, I think 6th grade.
It's
7? So our city attorney says 8th grade, I mean, 7th, 8th grade. So I agree.
Middle school.
Middle school. So I agree,
Yeah.
Mr. Lyles, we should be writing it in a way that an 7th or 8th grader can read it. I think, and so we can write it in that way. I just think what gets complex for us is sometimes the legal requirements that we have to put in policy. And that, you know, to meet those legal requirements that are not written sometime in 8th grade language, to sometimes capture some of the more complex things that we train to that can be also not written in that way, right? And I think, and oftentimes when people are not police officers, some of the language that we use, people are just not used to hearing, right? So I think it's a combination between the two, but I do agree that the vast majority of the policy, the meat of it, should be written at that 8th grade level. That's what the city attorney tells us that we should, the level that we should write it at. Remember that in order to be an Oakland police officer, all you need is a high school diploma, right? And so we also need to make sure that we're not writing it in a way that our own officers can't comprehend what it is that they're being expected to do. So we do take that into consideration. I just think the complex parts tend to be the legal requirements, and then sometimes some of the policy and practice, or if you would, best practice language that might be used that we sometimes put into policies to explain our actions. I think that can sometimes make it a little more challenging for people to understand.
You know, I want to suggest, I think we kind of have two tasks tonight. One of the things I wanted to do was to find out if we could suggest a sentence to CPA to substitute for this bullet. And because this is their this is their information that's being disseminated to the public. Can we fashion a substitute sentence that would accurately reflect what we want to capture? And then we have our detailed policy that we still need to get to. But again, were we to say that, dear CPA, we suggest that you change the sentence instead of having it read as it does now, that you change it to this policy also reminds officers that they must keep their body camera on during, keep their body cameras on whenever they are engaged in law enforcement activity or something like that. I mean, what could we say or suggest to them that they say in that last bullet point? You know, that it has to be on with few exceptions or something. What could we suggest to them that they change this language to?
Is this bullet intended to refer to the body worn camera policy? This policy, what policy are they referencing when they say this policy also reminds officers that they must keep their body camera on?
I think that this flyer is meant to address searches of people on supervised release.
Okay, so there's a policy on interfacing with people on supervised release.
Mhm.
And does that policy say that officers must keep their body camera on during every encounter?
No, and that's what I think Lieutenant.
Yeah, I
Chalmers'
think
point
they are
is.
misrepresenting that policy.
Yes,
But I think
And-
if they just add every investigative encounter with the public, then it's right.
Okay.
okay.
So
And
So
we
then,
can suggest the language. Or
mean-
somebody should suggest the language or send back to them what is the better language to use.
Yeah.
I mean, just the insertion of investigative makes it consistent with our policy. Our policy requires officers to activate their cameras on any investigative encounter. So
Okay. Will that dispose of it for everybody?
Chief, I don't think does your policy require activation for every witness statement?
No. But investigative encounter from our standpoint, I think a witness statement, we don't consider that to be in terms of an investigative encounter. I think we can, I mean, it could be more clear because Jesse, I think, yeah, I mean, one could interpret a witness as an investigative encounter from our standpoint. It is, what we mean is that it is investigating a crime, meaning a proactive stop, if you would, a detention, if you would, or something that would lead to some law enforcement action, if you would.
I mean, it kind of the issue, we're dealing with two issues. Number one is we don't want to say the word suspect, right? The second is that we also are still fleshing out or figuring out what the parameters of the current policy is. And so in that way, it is difficult to say you need to change it in this particular way. Perhaps it's premature to make that suggestion at the moment.
But we're not studying their policy. I don't know. I have to admit, I don't know what the policy for people on supervised release is. And that's what this, at the beginning of this bullet, that's what this policy also, when it says this policy, is referring to the people on supervised release policy. Am I right? And do we have an ad hoc on that? No.
We used to. It's over.
Yeah. So I'm not familiar enough with that policy to say this policy also reminds officers that they must keep their body camera on during every encounter, except what the chief and the Lieutenant Turner are telling us. I'm not familiar enough with the policy.
Can I make a suggestion that we take? I think we all agree that that this particular sentence is not quite correct, that it does require some tweaking or suggestion. Frankly, we've spent, I think, a good amount of time on a document that neither the commission nor the department has put, nor any of the organizations here has put out about the accuracy of it. May I suggest that we take this particular topic offline and maybe get to the actual policy, and then perhaps that may inform us what it is that we need to tell the coalition of how to adjust their flyer. And Commissioner, Vice Chair, I'm looking at you for agreement. I do see hot nods of the head, but Commissioner Harbin Forte unfortunately disconnected.
That sounds good to me.
Yes, because this really requires that we also know something about the policy on supervised release.
All right, then I am putting it away, and maybe perhaps I could ask Lieutenant Turner to take over.
Thanks, Jesse.
Yes, thank you. So, yeah, I think like Commissioner Shea said, this is a good segue. You know, it's a little bit of cart before the horse to talk about the messaging of what it is that what our body-worn camera policy says. So I've come to the part, and I think this is a good use of our time tonight to talk about required activation. So like the chief was talking about, you know, our policy is that, you know, and this policy is very similar to our current policy, but that the officers who are wearing this body-worn camera activate it prior to participating in any of these circumstances. And like he mentioned, it is basically Fourth Amendment seizures, or where the person is, you know, for lack of a better term, a suspect or a person of interest, right? So when we are contacting these people to confirm or dispel a suspicion that they are involved in criminal activity as the suspect, if we are actually detaining or arresting someone, if there's any sort of evaluation or assessment for psychiatric detention, pursuits, arrest warrants or search warrants, conducting any searches, transporting, and then we're seeking to add things like if they are involved in a vehicle collision, because as you heard the chief say, that is one where there's a lot of liability. And so having that accurate recording after the fact would be helpful. And then there is, as Commissioner Shea pointed out, a law around recording of photographic or in-person lineups. Those almost the vast majority of those are done by criminal investigations in a recorded interview room. So they are recorded in certain other areas. But if they are done in the field, to use a body worn camera. But that is the required activations circumstances we have now, is during these, what, our officers understand as investigative encounters. As you heard the chief say, any encounter with the public, that's, like I mentioned, a large expansion, like the chief mentioned as well. And there are some costs and drawbacks around it.
You told us the story last time about someone being escorted to the bathroom.
Yeah.
And so is it just transporting by vehicle, but also being escorted?
Yeah, and that is that was an interesting edge case that occurred. And right now what we have is anytime the officers, the field officers are bringing a person in or escorting someone into the police department, that they are required to have their cameras on.
Is that here somewhere?
So that's if the officer, so that person is under arrest. So that would be during a detention or arrest. The officers with the feet in their uniform would have the cameras on.
That's detention and arrest. Okay. So in that scenario you gave us, that officer was somehow brought before.
So that one, like I said, was one where it was a CID, an investigative officer. They're not in uniform, and was one where they, had some sort of encounter with a person actually who was not under arrest, was not a suspect, I believe. Actually looked back at the circumstances of it, and it was something where it was more of a encounter that went sort of confrontational. With a person who was not under arrest or being detained. So when people are under arrest or being detained, they are under sort of body worn camera. Either the body worn camera, or for the investigators, the interview rooms, which have full camera systems.
Okay. Is Commissioner Harbin Forte not on this call anymore? Did we lose her accidentally?
Can we
She
go
said
back
that
to the,
lost her connection, but it sounds like, and she will get back on as soon as she can.
Okay.
Sounds like Mr. Lyles has.
I just want to quickly, we finished the going to the bathroom, taking a suspect to the bathroom. Are we going to be photographing that, recording that, or not?
Yeah, so that is, and I think there is some area for adding in escorting, right person, just specifically drawing it out. So I think actually I actually.
Yeah, we got to flesh that out, because once the person goes to the bathroom from the interview room, those cameras are no longer recording.
Right.
So
The person, the officer, what the CID investigators typically do is they have a uniformed officer with a body worn camera who then takes.
And that person takes them on, he has to,
right,
and have to keep it on.
Exactly.
Should that be in the policy?
Right. So that's, they're already required, but because of the fact that they're interacting with a person who's under arrest, so the uniformed officer has to have their body worn camera on. But I do think that it's worth saying that if we're going to be escorting someone around, actually had some language here.
That's what I meant by saying more words. So so nothing is assumed, just
I
add
understand
that.
it. Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Probably won't be in this year's slam dunk contest, but the 6th Street Curry can get up in the air when he wants to. This is the 7th year in which Curry has held his.
I also am confident that the Warriors will repeat next year, just for anyone's. Sorry, that wasn't me. But anyway, yeah, something like this: escorting a detained or arrested person who's in custody at a police facility from a patrol vehicle to an interview room, or from the interview room to the restroom. Yeah.
Okay.
I have a question. Paragraph number 1. Paragraph number 1 there says contact with the person to confirm or dispel a suspicion person may be involved in criminal activity as a suspect. I think that there are situations. You show up on scene, there's a call about, you know, sort of a fight between two people. You have no idea which one's gonna be the suspect, right? Or body worn camera activated for contacts with both.
Right. So in that circumstance, yeah, if there's criminal activity and we think someone is on scene, maybe the suspect, you're not sure who it is, then in that case, yeah, if you're trying to determine, are you involved in this criminal activity as a suspect, then yes, camera should be on.
Correct. Oftentimes in those situations, there's also numerous witnesses, right? For the most part, those witness statements are recorded or not.
So
I know
it
policy says
depends.
one thing, but like it's sort of like what is the capture rate of witnesses in
Right.
that sort of scenario?
Yeah, the capture rate of in that sort of scenario where officers are showing up to like an unknown trouble call, where it's like we believe that people who may be suspects, right, are on scene. Cameras should be on. The officers show up, they start talking, asking questions. Cameras continue to be on. They say, hey, you know, Mr. Turner, what's your involvement? Well, I was just a witness. Okay, tell me what you saw. So capture rate at that, like for that type of thing, is going to be relatively high. For something where Officer Turner is now going to canvass for witnesses after a shooting or a robbery or something like that, and we're looking around the area, don't believe suspects are in the area, or they've been arrested, or they are clearly gone, have fled the scene or something like that, capture rate is going to be low because we are not investigating these people in the neighborhood as possible suspects. We're trying to elicit any information about the crime.
When this decision was made to make it specifically about, you know, confirming or dispelling suspicion of suspects, as opposed to just capturing witness statements, victim statements, whatever you can, because you never know the next time you're going to talk to them, or, you know, record in general. Why only suspects?
Well, I think you really have to go back to what some of the things that the chief talked about, risk management, and when you look at that. So I see the chiefs come back on, but yeah, I think that's priority.
I just want to say that, I mean, it is challenging investigating crime in the city of Oakland already, right? The vast majority of community members don't feel safe communicating with the police. And when officers are recording witnesses to a crime, things like that, they tend to obviously not want to be recorded. Oftentimes, even people in the vicinity of police officers don't want to be recorded or seen on those cameras. So I think, I think the mandate is the people who we know that we are, intentionally focused on, right? And so that we are intended to contact for the purpose for a law enforcement purpose. I think that's the most important people that we capture on camera, as opposed to, causing people to actually not want to, comply with the officer at all, or not provide information because we want to put them on camera as a witness or as a victim in some cases. So I think it was intentional to maintain the focus on the officer's intentional actions towards a person, as opposed to focusing the camera on witnesses. It just would have been much more challenging for us.
What is the rate at which witnesses will decline to speak with officers if they are being recorded?
So even with recording device or not, it is in the high, probably 80 percentile, that people don't want to, it is a large percentage of people do not want to be seen talking to police officers or giving a statement to police officers. It is, and understandably so, with the level of violence that we're facing, that, people were afraid for retaliation purposes. And so we oftentimes, are met with people's resistance to want to even have any contact with us. And so I think that's the challenge that we face in Oakland, as we have a sort of no snitching environment in our city that sort of permeates throughout the community, and people are very resistant to being seen having any dialogue with OPD or any law enforcement officer.
And what is the rate of people who are willing to talk after being told, or there is some statement that you're not going to get recorded, your name's not going to show up, and your address is not going to be in anything?
Well, I'm not comfortable sharing that type of information publicly, but I will say that we do get a higher level of compliance when our CID investigators go out, non-uniformed police officers in not marked patrol cars, and have the ability to go inside of people's residences without the public knowing that it's a police officer. We are a bit more successful retrieving statements in that way than we are in uniform and in a marked car.
When those investigators do retrieve statements, they generally, for statements, I know that you have to have their name, contact information, address, if they have one, date of birth, that information, that's you get in the regular course when you're taking statements, right?
Yes.
And so separate from this, like scene talking to police, right? Or is there a way for these statements to be recorded without that public perception of, hey, someone's talking to the police officer, right? Because I do think that one of the things that I think about when I think about how I'm going to look at a case is, if you have an unrecorded statement, you have two witnesses whose moral character comes into play, right? You have the complaint, you have the witness or the victim, and then you have the police officer,
Yeah.
right? And I'd like to remove that as much as possible,
Yeah.
for your benefit. So that's less Pitchess motions, that's less Brady motions, that's less sort of going after a police officer on the stand. Is there a way to, and these are, we played with these body worn cameras. I wouldn't say played, but like we saw them, we held them, we used them, and they're relatively discreet. You don't have to necessarily put them on. You can just bring them with you in a pocket or in a suit jacket, whatever it might be, show up to someone's house and activate it inside, or just sort of have it pointed off in a different direction. Are we in a situation where that is possible with and still avoiding or minimizing the sort of minimizing the effect of the no snitch culture?
Well, I think, it is up to the witness. I think what we currently do is a couple things. We would prefer that we were able to tape the statement. And we still use audio taping to tape a statement. If the person was willing to go on camera and give the statement, we'd also accept that. So they are equipped to be able to do both forms, but we also, are ready and prepared if the person does not want to do either of those two, to actually take a written statement, which is what we don't want to do. I mean, because like you said, then obviously, the credibility of both people are in question. But I think it really is up to the witness and what, they're comfortable doing. What we don't want to do is put them in a position where we say that this is the only way that we can take a statement is audio or recorded, we just want to make sure that we have the ability to get their information in the way in which they're comfortable giving it to us. And so, it really is about what the victim's preference or witness preference would be. So I think, there might be room for language to write something that what our preference would be. The department's preference would be that the officer take, an audio statement, but to, seek if the person is unwilling, whatever language, but it might be open to try to say what our preference would be.
Yeah, I think just to expand on what the chief said, I have relatively recently been a CID investigator, and I think our investigators are very cognizant of the fact that it is much easier to get the case charged by the DA for the case to go through the system without having to do a lot of back and forth with a recorded statement. And, we do attempt to get these recorded statements. This policy is, and this is one of the limitations you can see of the policy, is it really is geared towards uniformed officers. It is really geared towards this idea, because this was created around the idea of uniformed officers and what were they doing vis-a-vis their police powers, their detention and arrest and force powers. It was not really created with the thought around CID investigators. But I do think, and I think our DA's office is very good as well as at letting us know when there are problems with, or witness credibility, where we have to do a Prop 115 or something like that, and understanding that. So I think that is like the chief said, that's something that's really happening a lot, where as much as possible, we're trying to get these recorded statements, that we do things like go to people's homes and ask them discreetly, hey, would you like to come to the police department at some point? So we can get you in an interview room that is recorded. So there's no question about that. But that, like he said, that we do want to be flexible, especially when it comes to these investigators. This is a policy that is primarily geared toward, for better or for worse, those uniformed officers, and that clear interaction between uniformed police officer and person who is having their liberty infringed, right, by that police officer.
So I heard that the chief said there might be space for preference. I do think we do find that space. I also think that there might be space for maybe making clear, either via report or deactivation, whatever it might be, reasons for not. I think we had that. You added that line where it said, prior to deactivation, members shall state the reason why they're deactivating. As specifically, especially around witness statements, right? I do think it's worth it for that purpose. I do think that when we think about, I'm cognizant of the fact that, it's hard to get people to talk. I experienced that myself, and oftentimes wish I could record. I do think that we need to document some of these things. That's kind of what I'm trying to get as much as into as possible. And perhaps, well, I'll double check the written statement policy, but perhaps it might also mean writing less statements.
I think I agree with you. I mean, I think that's the goal, right? When I talk about it, time efficiency, right? It is much more time efficient for us to be able to take a recorded statement as opposed to the officer having to transcribe what somebody is saying, right? That is, obviously not what we want to be doing, particularly in the field. And so I think, like to Lieutenant Turner's point, I think our officers would prefer a recorded statement as well. It's just that, sometimes community members don't want their voice on, don't want that voice on that statement, right? That's just a challenge, right? And I think, they feel like if you write a statement, sometimes they can try to contradict that statement. Well, I didn't really say that, or, you get it, they have some wiggle room. You put an audio statement doesn't give you very much wiggle room. And I think they know that. So people are oftentimes reluctant to go on record.
I want to, sorry, I've taken up so much time. I want to also ask some of the other ad hoc members about some of these sections and the required activation sections. Perhaps, I know that we have some CPRA staff on. Frida Caro, Jason Wechter, if you're still here. What are your thoughts about the required activation sections?
I think it would really be the role of Director Zisser to express an opinion about this on behalf of the CPRA. I think we're just here to provide information and report back to him. So I would be comfortable.
I can't understand.
We can't hear him.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
It's very muffled.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I'm wearing a headset. Is this any better?
Slightly.
As I said, I think it would be up for interim director Aaron Zisser to offer an opinion on behalf of the CPRA.
Oh. Who is this on? Who are you? Are you with the CPRA? Who's speaking?
Yes, but I don't know that I'm authorized to speak on behalf of the agency.
Jason, can you do me a favor, please? Can you just sort of yell at us and pretend you're yelling at us, because it's very, very difficult to hear. Just yell it out.
I think that CPRA Director Aaron Zisser would be the person who would have to express an opinion on the part of the CPRA. I don't feel comfortable expressing an opinion representing the agency.
We have, yeah, and we have Frida here as well. I'm not sure what the disclaimer is.
Maybe I could try it a different way.
Okay.
Perhaps either Mr. Wechter or Ms. Kara, I know you review cases. I know that you oftentimes look at body worn cameras. Can you let us know perhaps what situations, as you're investigating complaints, you don't see body worn camera activations on where you would, or that it would make it easier for investigations?
Frida, Jason?
I'll leave it to Frida to answer that because she looks at more body worn camera footage than I do.
While Frida, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, yeah, it's just a little bit of a broad question. What instances we don't see cameras where we should? We've gotten a couple questions where the camera was, well, complaints where the camera was activated too late during an interaction. And I can recall that a complainant was saying that the beginning of the interaction was questionable, and if the officer approached them with this suspicion that a crime was being committed, why wasn't the camera on from the beginning? I don't want to get more specific than that, but that's one that comes to mind.
Okay, the required activation aspect, is there anything additional then that we need to add from any member of the ad hoc, any additional language? Okay. Have we gotten through this section? Now, what else do we have?
One question before you go back, before the, scroll back, Jesse, Lieutenant Turner. When we say members assigned a BWC, that's a broad range, including those officers who are working undercover or investigating in plain clothes. Am I right? They also have body worn cameras.
Yeah, that's correct. I think this is actually a vestige from the previous policy when assignment was solely based on whether you were in uniform or not. And so, yeah, you're correct. The proper thing is probably when they are wearing, because there are those strict wear requirements, right, for uniformed officers, for those people who are in plain clothes who put on that uniform equipment that identifies them as police officers, et cetera.
I just, there are situations where CID investigators not wearing uniform might come across a situation in one of these numbered paragraphs.
It is possible.
Do we want body worn cameras to be activated during those times?
I think the better question is, because I think we want, right? It's whether our desire is outweighs, like Chief Armstrong says, some of the unintended consequences. I think that's what we're trying to look at. So I will say that, for instance, our CID investigators, for myriad reasons, are not doing the things that our uniformed officers are doing, like making investigative stops, car stops, walking stops, attempting detentions or arrests, things like that. They are not in the proper uniform. They do not have their safety equipment. That is, we specifically train. We have lost an officer, unfortunately, who was in plain clothes, who made a stop and was misidentified by other police officers and was killed. So these things happen. And so what we instead are very clear on is that the officers are, when they are doing things like serving search warrants or arrest warrants, that they identify themselves as police, put on this safety equipment, which includes a vest, and that something conspicuously identifies them as police. So additionally, anecdotally, I am hearing that, yeah, we have some CID officers who, well, when they are working overtime or anything like that, obviously they're required to wear their body worn camera if they are in their uniform. But in actual fact, while it's possible, it is definitely possible for CID investigator, if they are out in the field, say canvassing after an incident, and then the suspect returns, that they might have that chance encounter. It is an edge case. The thing that we see most of the time is that, and what we train is for the officers to safely, if they can, observe this person from a distance and call in the uniformed officers.
So Jesse, I would add to that, if they're wearing it and they encountered any of those requirements, they would still have to activate it. So chance encounter, you out there, you got the camera on, and a guy jumps out the bushes in front of you, and you're going to address it because you have to, you need to activate your camera, right? If you have it on, you need to activate it, right? If you're going to fit under any of these requirements. And so I think it would apply when I'm reading it, members wearing a body worn camera. So the body worn camera would be affixed to your, even if you had on civilian clothes or, not uniform clothes, but if you fall under any of these requirements or got involved in any of these things, you're not allowed to do it by policy, but there are extenuating circumstances that can happen. Exigency while you're doing your investigative follow-up, who's to say what could happen? It's happened before. Things have happened while investigators are not trying to have contact with somebody, but they end up having contact. And if they have a camera on, they should activate it.
Okay. Anything else on in any part of this section? Did we get through the bottom part of it, the bottom part of the screen? Anything additional, any of the added language?
Yes, just one thing, Chair, that maybe Commissioner Shea could just weigh in on this. So did add there, when conducting any photographic or in-person lineup, not recorded by some other means. So like I did mention, we don't do in-person lineups almost exclusively. We don't have our own jail anymore, and in-person lineups are prohibitively expensive. But photographic lineups, we do those. The law is clear that those do need to be recorded. Those are pretty much about 99% of those done in an interview room where it is recorded. However, this would capture for if those were done in the field, that they would be required to use the body worn camera.
Cool. What about the infield? The show up?
So that would be covered because that person is under arrest or detained. So yeah.
Okay, that was my question. Okay, good.
Wait, sorry. That law also generally is geared towards recording the procedure and the witness who is engaged in that process. In the show up scenario, generally you have two sets, right? Two sets of areas, one where the suspect is detained for showing, and the other with the officer with the witness. Is the officer with the witness covered in that scenario? Is that a required activation? It doesn't seem like unless, because this says lineup, not show up, or identification procedure.
Yeah, that's correct. So this does go back to this idea that for the most part, we are attempting to get recordings. Our officers understand that an infield, when recorded on the body worn camera or an audio recording, is going to be better in terms of just the thoroughness of the case. However, just as the chief mentioned, there are many people, getting people to the point where they're going to get into a police car and drive to a scene where a person is detained or arrested, and then say that that is him or her is a difficult road to climb. So it is not a requirement. It is a best practice, but not a requirement.
I don't like it, but I'm not hearing a lot of weight. I'm not hearing a lot. Well, I don't like it. That's all I can say. I get it, but I don't like it.
I agree.
I understand, but forcing us to do it would have a huge impact on our ability to secure witness statements and IDs of suspects. I mean, absent that, it'd have a huge impact on our crime fighting efforts for sure.
Okay. Shall we move on then?
Yeah, absolutely. So I know we don't have much time left, Chair, but just one thing did add that prior to deactivation, that the members would verbally note the reason why they're deactivating. We're seeing this anecdotally, that most officers do this. This is a best practice I've seen in other departments' policies, and it does sort of focus the mind on why it is that the person is deactivating and provides that record.
Anything from anyone on that change?
Yeah, I'm kind of curious as what don't you like about it, Jesse?
That you're talking about the show up
Yeah.
recording a witness.
Yeah.
I think that accuracy of the statement regarding the identification is very important. It's very important because sometimes an officer may just say it was a positive identification. Well, that person may say, well, actually, I'm mostly sure that's the person, but not, and so it's capturing the exact statement, right? There are other ways to do it, obviously, but even in best practices, it doesn't always get captured. And eyewitness identification is one of the greatest places fraught with areas where people can get falsely convicted. Lots of science about it, and that is one of the biggest things, especially in recording not just the witness, but also the officer who is conducting the identification procedure, what they say, what cues they give to those witnesses, how it is that they may confirm or bolster an identification that is made, or question when it is made or not made. There are just so many things that go into it.
Yeah, I thought that was it. I wanted to be sure. Thank you.
Yeah. I'll let someone else talk.
I don't know that anyone else had anything to add, so we're good. And do we need anything from anyone else before we go? And it's 7:27. Why don't we try to see what a good stopping point is? What's next?
Okay. Yeah. So
I do have some things for deactivation. What I'll do is I will send them to Lieutenant Turner as we're wrapping up for deactivation, and we can talk about it next time.
Okay. So why don't we go ahead and end here?
Yeah.
And we will be back Tuesday after next, which will be, let me see on that one, I may be out of town.
What's our timeline for wrapping this up?
You know, I don't know that we ever actually set one, although we thought. Wait.
We go back on the 25th. If we're not that meeting, the next meeting in September?
Yeah, I think we're looking at September, try to get this
Okay.
Yeah, so just for
probably late
your
September.
awareness, yeah, Vice Chair and Commissioners, the at the first meeting, there's likely some things that have come back from previous policy developments, right? Where employee relations has conducted some of the outreach with the unions that they're required to do, and I think they're going to come back with
Okay.
things that we've done in use of force before. So I know there are some urgencies around that one. The nice thing about body worn cameras is we do have a policy. You know, we're recording now, so there's a little bit less urgency. We always want to have the best policy, but there's not a strict timeline on this one like some other ones we saw.
Do you have a list of the policies that need to be agendized then?
Yeah, you know what? I've actually sent that. I think there were a couple that I sent to you and Chair Malele and to the two attorneys for
right.
the 25th. Yeah, so that's in your email.
All right.
On Tuesday, the 23rd, I need to be out of town. You know, I suppose you all could go ahead. Commissioner Peterson and Commissioner Shea, Vice Chair Peterson and Vice Chair Shea, so that we don't lose the momentum.
Okay.
I thought that was what your question was. Do we have a deadline for this policy?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking that I think that when we first started out, we generally talked about trying to get it done by September, sometime late September. And I don't know, I mean, what's your sense of how much more wordsmithing we have to do? Are there?
Well, I'll be honest, Chair, that the real meat of the policy is this that we've gone over, and we've kind of come to about 75% done, which is the section B around required activation, when you can deactivate, things like that. There's a lot of information to digest around the way that the department uses these. Like you heard Chief Armstrong say, a lot of the accountability reviews and this policy sort of spells those things out as to how supervisors, commanders, our Office of Internal Accountability, Internal Affairs, how they review these files in the rest of the policy, but the sort of meat of when the officer is required to turn it on and can turn it off is the things that we've been discussing.
So how many more meetings, Lieutenant Turner, you think we might need?
I'm not a betting man, so I'm not sure I want to say.
Well, how, Lieutenant, Reggie, how is this looking in terms of the public point of view that you are concerned with? Are we getting there? Is there more to be done?
Is Reggie still on?
No.
Oh,
Did
he's
you-
not still on.
So-
Let's do, well, you guys can talk about it more, I guess. So we're gonna meet on August 23rd. You'll meet then, and then the next would be September 6th. And we have a police commission meeting that week, but we're not gonna try to do it. And then the next will be September 20. We have a police commission meeting that week, but we are not gonna have, we probably won't be ready to present any kind of final, probably not until October, early October.
Why?
I'm going to tell you right now, there's not going to be space on the September 22nd one. And there probably will not be space on the earlier September one. We have 10 to 12 policies that we have to push through on militarized equipment for that month.
Okay. All right. Just curious. I don't want to belabor anything if we can get it.
Yeah.
on the-
We
on
can
the
get it
calendar.
finalized, even if we don't
Yeah.
present it until later, you know.
Okay,
So we could still shoot for getting it finalized in September. But we
okay,
probably can't present it to the commission. May not be able, can't present it to the commission probably until early October, but let's get it done. and finalized. Okay, so the 23rd then at 6 p.m. And I'll leave it in everybody's capable hands, and I'll see everybody again on September 6th. That should be fine. Okay. All right. Well, thank you all,
Ready.
everybody. And then let's see, this is Kamoya Johnson. You're from Our Joy as well, right?
Yes, correct.
Okay. And then Jody Geddes is from Our Joy. So thank you all very, very much. And we'll see some of you or all of you on 23rd.
thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thanks.
Everyone,
And
bye.
Chief, and I really want to thank the chief for
Later.
joining us. This is really good. Glad that he was here. Okay. Bye. We can leave.